Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 36th California Small Farm Conference. My name is Guido Lois. I'm a Communications and Events Manager with CAF, which stands for Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And we have an amazing panel today. I'm so happy. I'm doing it with my coworker, Grace, who will introduce all the speakers later. But before we get into that, I wanted to go over some logistics. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, just so you know. We're going to send the recording later via email. And if you have any questions, we ask you to put them using the Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom of your screen. If you don't know where that is or you don't see it, it might be under More, which is a button with three little dots at the bottom right of your screen, of your Zoom screen. And we're trying to keep those separate from the chat so we can make sure that we address all the questions. So your collaboration is greatly appreciated on that. And yeah, finally, I just wanted to ask our sponsors for making this possible. And with that, Grace, please take over.
All right, it would help if I muted myself first. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and then we can go ahead and get started. All right, let's see. All right, can I get a thumbs up from someone if you can see my screen okay with the presentation? Thank you. All right, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop, Producing Safe and Compliant Value-Added Foods. For the next hour, we're going to hear presentations from our wonderful panelists that will explain the regulatory landscape of producing value-added food products in California, as well as practical implementation of safe, compliant, and successful value-added food products. My name is Grace Perry, and I am the Farmer Services Regional Lead covering the Central Valley at CAF, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. CAF provides technical assistance to growers related to value-added food products, so I encourage you to reach out to me after this webinar if you want to speak more. And then finally, we are saving the last 10 to 15 minutes of this workshop for audience questions. So as Guido said, please drop your questions into the Q&A box throughout the panelist presentations. We might be able to answer some as we go and hopefully have some time at the end as well. I'm honored to introduce today's panelists, Dr. Linda Harris, Ellen Rawley, and Jenna Muller. Dr. Linda Harris is a professor of cooperative extension in the Department of Food Science and Technology at the University of California, Davis. She oversees a research program on microbial food safety and provides expertise throughout the food chain on food safety microbiology and related regulations. Ellen Rawley is the founder of Ellen Rawley Creative and Strategy, which helps farms and food businesses launch and grow profitable product lines. Her go-to-market services include organic and food safety compliance, grant writing, and product strategy. She started her career consulting with farms after working as a gardener, jam maker, and product designer for a Northern California olive oil ranch. Jenna Muller is a second-generation owner of Full Belly Farm, where she, along with her husband, lead the value-added production branch of the farm. She has developed a line of jams, sauces, baked goods, and fermented products, which are sold to grocery stores and direct to consumer. She also works as a mediator and is a mother of 3. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to start us off with Dr. Linda Harris's presentation.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and to give you an overview of this topic. There we go. I have slide control. This is wonderful. It is almost impossible in 15 minutes to cover this topic, so I'm trying to do this at kind of a high level just to give you enough information to kind of know where you need to ask questions. But overall, federal regulations pertaining to value-added food products are divided by the USDA and the FDA. Meat, poultry, egg products, and catfish. I don't have on the screen here, but catfish and these other products are under USDA regulation. And then pretty much everything else is under FDA regulation. Now, I've highlighted seafood, dairy, and juices because while the foods under FDA regulation are under kind of umbrella regulations under the Food Safety Modernization Act, seafood, dairy, and juices have additional regulations that pertain to them. If we look at federal, that's typically when products cross state lines, but it can also apply to products that are sold intrastate, so in the state. And if we look at the state regulatory authority, which often works hand in hand with their federal counterparts, you can see that California Department of Food and Ag is responsible for the same things that USDA is, but they also deal with dairy products, including products resembling milk products. And these are products, plant-based milk, plant-based ice cream. So things that don't have dairy products in them, but are use dairy names. So that falls under the products resembling milk products. And then raw, non-value added fruits and vegetables also fall under CDFA. And again, California Department of Public Health then covers the rest of the foods that are not covered by CDFA. So what I'm going to cover in this presentation, there's a lot of information as secondary resource that you can go to at my website, ucfoodsafety.ucdavis.edu. And there you'll find a link to a publication that was actually with one of my colleagues, Erin DiCaprio, and the Community Alliance for Family Farmers. It is a really good resource to kind of walk you through, similar to what I am walking through today, only it's in writing and something that you can have a look at to see how it might apply to the products that you are either processing or envisioning that you might want to process. So this is just a partial excerpt of the flow chart that this brochure takes you through. So I highly recommend, if you don't already have this brochure, to get to go and download it, because I think you'll find it extremely helpful. I decided, based on some presentations I've given in the last couple of years on this very topic, to use a scenario, and I'm calling it Tamatic Family Farm. I'm saying it's in Yolo County. This is based on a farm that I know, not in Yolo County, but I used some of the items that they grow, and I added a couple of things to what they actually do. But this is not this is so kind of taken from real life with a little bit of things made up to illustrate some points I wanted to illustrate. So there's a home kitchen, there's an actual on-farm retail store that has a kitchen at the back, and then there's a building that is used to store food. So it's just a warehouse. They grow almonds, oranges, olives, and tomatoes, and they are direct to consumers. So either from the retail store, they also have an online presence, and there is some wholesale, so that they're selling to other people who are selling from their stores. So all of these things will come into play as I move through this scenario of the various product. So again, walk in and online sales. They've got olive oil, a variety of confections that they're making in the retail kitchen, and raw and roasted nuts. They've come to me to ask about selling tomato-based salsas, both a shelf-stable version and a refrigerated version. And they want to make a full sugar and a low sugar marmalade. So I'm going to walk through these various scenarios of the different types of foods and the different regulations that apply as we make choices in this particular scenario. So the olive oil, in this case, they're using a co-packer. So they are fortunate to have a local small-scale olive oil processor nearby. That facility is registered as a food processor. They are able to receive the olives grown on this farm. They do all the pressing, packaging, and labeling, and the Tamantic Farms just picks up those bottles of olive oil and then brings it to the warehouse and then sells it from the store or online. So this is pretty straightforward. This can work for many types of foods, but it becomes challenging for growers who want to use their raw materials in making the product, because then there are logistical issues with getting the product at its peak of ripeness to the processing facility and scheduling and things like that. It's not impossible, and certainly works for many people, but is not always an option for when the raw ingredients are something that you're growing on your farm. But this is an example of where it would work. Moving on to the shelf-stable products. So shelf-stable meaning can be held and sold under non-refrigerated conditions. So we have a variety of confections, as I mentioned, and this full sugar and low sugar marmalade. So I want to point out that there is actually FDA guidance on what marmalade should be. It's not a standard of identity, but it is guidance on what makes a marmalade, including the amount of sugar that you would find in a marmalade. And so that is not in the low sugar version, and that becomes important when we look at our options for making that product. Now, as you've probably already guessed, the farm is kind of beyond a cottage food laws, but if it were in a different situation, a cottage food law might work. There are restrictions with the cottage food law, that is making food in a private kitchen, based on sales. So there's a limit to the amount of sales for a Class A operation, which is only direct to final consumer. Class B operation, you can sell to other people who are selling to the final consumer, but again, there's a cap on the amount of sales. You register in the county that you reside, so we would be registering in Yolo County. But although the nuts and the confections are on the list of recognized or approved food list with the cottage food law, low sugar marmalade would not be or is not on that list. And so in this particular scenario, this would not work, and the sales at this particular farm exceed these numbers. And so really this is not applicable in this particular case. However, the kitchen at the back of the retail store is set up or was built with the idea that it could be registered as a commercial kitchen. So a commercial kitchen essentially meets the California Retail Food Code, in which it acts like a restaurant kitchen. but it can be used to produce food that is not restaurant food, but food sold packaged to the consumer. It requires registration in the county and a food safety certification class, which can be taken online. It is restricted to selling directly to the final consumer, which works for the in-store and the online sales, but it would restrict those products from being sold wholesale or in distribution. So that is a factor to take into consideration. But a commercial kitchen license is something that a lot of people use as a first level of getting into value added. Commercial kitchens can also be rented and maybe in a local area where there is commercial kitchen space available, as opposed to having it on site. A commercial kitchen can also be registered as a food processor with the state. And so in this case, with California Department of Public Health, there's an annual fee. And I'm going to talk about what a qualified facility is in a second. You also have to register with FDA, but there is no fee. It's done online. And it's something that happens initially and then every couple of years. Well, not every couple, every 2 years, even numbered years. And the regulation that pertains to a processed food registration is 21 CFR 117, which is also known as the Preventive Controls for Human Food regulation. So under this regulation, there are a number of different subparts. The most important, I would say, for most people are the current good manufacturing practices, which is subpart B. But I'll also, in a subsequent slide, mention subpart C and subpart G, because they can also be important. But under subpart B, this is what we have traditionally called as good manufacturing practices. These are just the baseline things that you have to do to make safe food. And that includes training your personnel to know personal hygiene and what they need to do to make safe food, that you have a reasonable facility and grounds, sanitary facilities, that you're able to clean your equipment and you do clean your equipment. All of these things go into making safe food. And so these really are the core of what you need to comply with as a food processing facility. Now, a qualified facility is a very small business by the definition of this regulation. And you can see that we're talking about, in the range of a little over $1 million in sales for the preceding 3 calendar years. And so this is something that you need to keep track of if you want to apply as a qualified facility. And so this is something that is an option for smaller operations. And what that means is that, as I said, the subpart B would apply because that's the baseline, but then subpart C and G would not be a requirement for operating as a food processor if you meet the qualified food facility part. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my last couple of things, the tomato-based salsa. So a salsa in this imaginary case is tomatoes, onions, peppers, spices, and vinegar. And as I mentioned, a desire for 2 different products, refrigerated and shelf stable. So if we look at the refrigerated salsa, it's only sold on the farm store because it's difficult to ship. And it's not on the approved cottage food list. So again, even though this wouldn't be applicable here, it wouldn't be applicable at all for anybody. It could be made in a commercial kitchen. So that is an option. If we want to sell it from a neighboring farm store or another kind of somebody else is selling it for us, then again, we would have to register as a food processor in order to do that. There's a couple of additional notes with refrigerated foods. If pathogen growth is controlled only by temperature, it's not required, but strongly recommended that there is a secondary barrier, that temperature isn't the only thing that's preventing pathogen growth. And in this salsa, acid is that barrier. So that's a good thing for something like a refrigerated salsa. Perishable, keep refrigerated in a conspicuous location on the principal display panel. That's to communicate to the consumer that this needs to be refrigerated, and then stored and sold under refrigeration. So the warehouse, the kitchen, we need to have refrigeration capacity in order to make this product happen. If we switch and we want to do a shelf-stable salsa, and so again, this is a product that is typical of other things like pickled products, where you're taking low acid ingredients and combining them with acid ingredients. It is considered something called an acidified food. And acidified foods fall under another regulation, which is CFR 21 CFR Part 114. This salsa would require us to get trained, either an acidified school, which is a 2-day course, or the Better Process Control School, which is 4 days. It would require the product and the complete process to be submitted to the state. And if approved, then they would supply an S letter to the FDA, and it would require us to register as a cannery. On our website, we do have a very simple 2-page fact sheet that runs you through questions to answer whether or not you are making or hoping to make an acidified food, or if you might be exempt from that. So I encourage you to look at that as well. Again, University of California Laboratory for Research in Food Preservation is the state process authority, and where you have to fill out the forms and submit your product and your process to them for that S letter. So in summary, in this hypothetical Tamatic Farms, we are using a co-packer, or they are using a co-packer for their olive oil. They are either registered as a commercial kitchen or as a food processor, depending on where they want to sell those products. And registering as a food processor will give them more options in where they can sell. And the warehouse, just to note, separate building, but it also has to be registered because it is storing food. And in the end, a decision not to sell the shelf-stable salsa. It is absolutely possible for a small processor to qualify as a cannery selling acidified product, but it is an extra layer of things that you have to do. And so in this case, in my hypothetical scenario, I'm saying that they've decided not to do that. So with that, I will pass on to the next speaker. And I see there's a few questions in the chat. So
Thank you so much, Linda. That was wonderful information. I am going to pass it off to Ellen.
Hi, everyone. That was wonderful, Linda, and I think it segues really well into what I'll be talking about, which is some simple tracking solutions for small producers. So similarly with my presentation, there's so many, like you just heard, there's different regulations you might be required to fall under depending on what kind of food you make and how you make it. So instead of trying to kind of get too granular with each type of product, I wanted to present kind of something that is useful across the board, which is thinking about how you're going to track to uphold food safety in your operation. So often in my work with clients, I typically either see people when they're want to get ready for an inspection because they're trying to get their cannery registration or their processed food registration or what have you, or they're a few years in and they feel like they're always kind of behind the ball and kind of anxious that they're not keeping track of what they should be. And often the question that I get asked is, what do I need to do to pass my inspection? And I'd like to kind of shift that question a little bit in today's presentation to what do I need to do to produce a food safely? And the difference really is, there's the day of your, if you do decide to make your own product and get, say, a processed food registration or a cottage food certificate or a cannery license, there is that day that the inspector is going to come and they're going to look for certain things, but that is really only one day. And what I think is important for you as someone producing food to think about is, how am I going to continuously make sure the food I produce is safe? Reason why is really because having good tracking and really having a system to keep on top of your food safety, it's going to be protecting your customer from like foodborne illnesses and different like physical hazards and chemical hazards, but it's also protecting your reputation. Product that doesn't meet your specifications, you don't want there to be an issue with your product down the line, basically. And it's also, in a lot of ways, gathering information that you can use in different ways in your business. So it's providing an opportunity to like learn more and keep on metrics on your business. So we're going to talk first about why to track, other than, it's part of good manufacturing practices. Some of the product phases that you might go through in your operation, some tracking basics and tools, and also staying on top of it all. So why track? So there is often, again, when I'm working with small producers, I kind of get a lot of resistance to having to now be on top of their food safety if they are a food processor. I'll often kind of get viewpoints, things like, I'm forced to do this as part of unfair regulatory burden that's unneeded. It wastes my time. It's unfair for small producers. I'm not here to say any of that is not, there's not truth to pieces of that. But the reality is, if you want to be producing food to sell in the marketplace, it's kind of like the entry fee is, there is an amount of food safety that you have to stay on top of. So the alternate view that I'm kind of proposing here is that it's not only for the regulatory folks that you're doing this, it's also for you. Because if you ever choose to withdraw product from the marketplace, for example, things that have happened to me and when I was a jam maker, a batch of jam had, unfortunately, the lids were a little loose and some developed mold. We wanted to get that back. It wasn't actually a health issue, but we don't want people opening jars with mold. So you might choose to withdraw product from the marketplace, or you could be part of a recall. And a recall is not even necessarily anything to do with you. It could be an ingredient you were using that now is recalled. And you want to limit then the impact of those types of things on your own business. So kind of thinking about, how is food safety actually for me and not just for the regulatory people out there, is kind of, to me, helpful in taking ownership of this instead of just feeling like it's something you're pushed to do. So for example, you found a piece of glass in an open bag of sugar, or the pectin, this is for a jam maker, or the pectin you use is recalled, or a customer found mold in their strawberry jam when they opened it. Without any sort of tracking system, you would basically be recalling all of your products, because for most jam makers, all of the jam they make has sugar in it. All of it has pectin in it. And in the case of the strawberry jam, you probably, if you don't know which strawberry jam batch that strawberry jam that a customer brought to you was from, you might have to recall a month's worth of strawberry jam that you made. So without tracking, you're withdrawing a lot of product. With tracking, you could maybe, with that case of the sugar, focus it down to the only time we use this sugar was in the orange marmalade on February 2nd, and you can just have to deal with taking away that product. So we're going to talk a little bit about the product phases. These are phases that processing will go through. I basically, again, because I can't really handle every type of person who's making every type of product, this is basically somebody who's doing what we think of as processing. So like a jam maker, someone who's making a salsa, someone who's making a hot sauce, someone who's taking ingredients, doing some sort of processing step to them, and then selling that final product, not meat. This is really like, for example, those ones I just gave, like a jam maker, someone who's making hot sauce, someone who's making, say, food in jars, we could say, just to narrow it down. But why I'm going through this is no matter what you're making, kind of thinking about what these steps are for you and how you would be able to then create a documentation process for yourself. So in receiving, so what receiving means is like when you are, say, purchasing ingredients. If you're doing something simple, say you're just drying your apple slices, the receiving might just be the harvesting. It's the harvesting of the apples on your own farm that you're going to dry, and then kind of knowing how much product you're drying and where you took the product that you're drying from. Receiving also could be, if you're working with a co-packer, then actually when you're receiving, you're probably receiving back finished product. Co-packers are interesting. So if you do elect to work with a co-packer, you kind of have to think about the different stages, because in some cases, maybe you order the ingredients but have them shipped to them. So you would probably want to keep a lot of the documentation related to the purchasing, versus some co-packers, they're doing that and they're keeping that documentation. So it's important to kind of think through these stages if you're working with a co-packer and how you're going to keep relevant documents. In this stage, what tracking allows you to do is really know where ingredients you be able to track when you purchase ingredients. And from there, you'll then be able to identify where they go. So when you're working backwards, you'll know, okay, this sugar was the sugar that I purchased on this date from this company, for example, with that sugar idea. Bonus impacts of having some way of tracking your receiving is it can limit how issues from other businesses impact your own. So say the glass in that sugar was from the actual sugar company and they are having to now recall sugar. If you have tracking and know when you used any sugar from that lot of product, you're making sure that your business isn't impacted on a larger scale by their issue and their processing. It also gives you historical data that you can use for projecting costs or looking for cost savings. Because if you include like a little bit extra and decide to include pricing data when you're doing your receiving logging, then now you have data that you can use for other purposes. From receiving, usually we go into production. So that's whatever kind of processing you're doing, whether that's like a mill and you're milling olives, or like I said, you're making hot sauce. What tracking in this part allows you to do is it often allows you to identify what ingredients went into each batch of product And then also show that you met any time, temperature, or pH controls when making the product. So we just heard about the cannery regulations and that S letter. The S letter is typically going to say, you know, if you're a cannery, you have to reach this temperature for this many minutes. It's having some sort of production tracking that's going to show that you actually met those measures. Bonus impacts of tracking your production. It keeps track of your recipes and any changes that you made to them for you to have over time. It helps you figure out what happened if a batch isn't up to your standards, because it's showing what went into that batch. It reminds, if you have people who are helping you, it reminds them of how to make the product. And it also helps you understand costs, depending on what you include in there. You could maybe have how many hours it took someone to make a batch, and then you would have that information. And then there's sales. So tracking your sales. What it allows you to do is identify where batches of product went after it left your control. And bonus impacts is that it quantifies your sales. So another part of what I do in the world is writing grants, for example, and actually having some way of knowing how many units of product did you actually sell in a given amount of time. If you don't have a point of sale system, is really important. You use that data in your own projections. And also if you ever want to go for grants or other things, actually having some sort of sales tracking is really helpful. So now that we kind of see the phases of production, let's talk about how we can track each one. And really what I'm thinking of is simple, trying to make this so that it's not this burden in your business, but really something that you can weave in. So I'm going to give some examples and then also give some advice on how to incorporate this with whatever you are actually doing. So to give you like an overview of like what we're hoping to achieve, we're basically hoping to achieve that there would be a way, and this I did for an organic presentation too, so you can see the certified organic. It doesn't have to be only for organic folks though. So basically what we're hoping to achieve is that you'd be able to trace back to a product, to what went in the product, and to the documentation you have about purchasing those ingredients. If you do purchase ingredients, or in the example where you're just harvesting, you know, the date that you harvested and where you harvested it from. That needs what we call a lot code. So you can see I have this like #18B4 is the lot code on the jar, and that is tracking to this receiving documentation, or sorry, this production document that says apple with the lot code yum and sugar sweet were put into this batch. And then from there, I can find the receiving documents that I purchased those products. So all of that runs off of what we call lot codes. And there I find that lot codes are a thing that like inspires so much animosity, hatred, and also like joy and love. So it's like they're like very, they just arouse a lot of emotion because it feels like super burdensome. So like now I have to have a code for everything and like, oh my God. But let's talk about some simple ways to do that. What they let you do is really link together all of your tracking. Why I support lot codes is because if you don't, a lot of people want to use like the lot codes that they receive from, if they're purchasing things, like why don't we just use their lot codes instead of creating our own? I find that you having control over your process actually means there's a whole lot less mistakes. So it takes a little bit of time to do, but it means the whole thing runs. So if you're operating under a cannery license, there's actually some specifics about what your lot code needs to do. Otherwise, and this again, I'm not really speaking to like meat and other things. I'm more speaking to the scenario of someone making food in jars. So say if you were under a PFR or you're under a cottage food license, you can create your own lot code system. So you can really keep it simple. If you're only making one batch of product a day, you could just use the date. It could be as simple as that. So let's look at receiving. So receiving records, again, could be really simple. Here's a receiving log. So it just says the date you received it, the product, the vendor, how much you received, and the vendor's lot code. And in this case, if I would just be using, say, the date as then my lot code for the ingredient. So this is capturing everything that I need for my receiving records to possibly capture. It's not super onerous in my mind. It's just, you have to have a system and then stay on top of it. Using the date as the lot code is really the simplest that I've seen from clients. And I think it's pretty amazing if you really do have like a small amount of purchasing. So if you did that, this is just a sample scenario. You use the date as the lot code, you write that date on the package or pallet of ingredients when it comes in, you use a log just so you can reference, and you write the date of receiving on the paperwork. So the receipt or bill of lading that you got when you purchased the material, and you keep that paperwork in a binder. And there you go. You have a whole receiving system. Production records. So this is an example of a processing record. So you can see in this one, we always have the same recipe for organic blueberry preserve. So I have it already all filled out so that I don't have to do that every time. And it's really clear where different information has to go. Then we have our time temperature checks for either this could be if there was a cannery that needs this, or also if you just know that you want, like, the product comes out best when you cook to 210 for 5 minutes. This also has fill temperatures to make sure you don't go under the temperature that provides for you to have a vacuum seal. So there's a lot of information you can fit on one piece of paper, and it's pretty, like, throughout the process, you just kind of fill in the blanks to make this one work. So like I said, pre-filling part of the forms makes them really easy to use. You could also make it really clear which cells need to be filled out with color coding. You can fill something like this out on an iPad or as a pen and paper, and then you just keep it in a digital folder or binder. And once a week, if you're doing production that often, you would just check that the ingredient lot codes on the production record match what's on your receiving log. And there you go, you have a system. Sales records are the most challenging. So some simple options are to do a pick list for your markets. Like when you're picking inventory to go to the farmer's market, say, you just say, okay, we're taking 50 cases of this lot code of product. And then when you come back, here's how much we're putting back into inventory. You could also, to keep it simple, instead of every sale having to keep track of a lot code, you could just create a log for every time you switch lot codes. So this one might not be like totally 100%, but it'll be pretty accurate that, say, on like March 2nd, we started selling this lot code of product, and then you sell through that before you switch to another one. Staying on top of it all, I'm going to go quickly because I'm at time. So one thing I recommend is having a compliance schedule. So this is just a really simple Excel sheet that you have. What are all the things I need to do to stay in compliance with all those different regulations that we heard called out in the last presentation? And then how often do I have to do it? And then who's going to do it? And then I just highlight which month it happens. So like every whatever month, I have to renew my FDA food facility registration. And then just once a month, open this and check what are the things I have to do this month. It keeps it really clear what all the things are each month that you have to do. In terms of your record keeping, I just suggest, depending on how often you produce, that say once a week, you look over all your records. If there's areas that if other people are filling them out that they're not filling out correctly, then you can catch that and retrain people. When the records you realize you are happy with them, you just store them in binders. If you do want to move data onto a spreadsheet, you can do them like that in batches and then maintain the records for the required time. Documents, so this is like your recall plan, and if you have standard operating procedures sounds really fancy. Basically, what I just said of like, first you do this, then you do that, then you do that, and there you have a system. That is a standard operating procedure. So just write down the steps that you're taking, and that's creating your standard operating procedure. And then make sure to have a date on it. Once a year, just review all that stuff, update it with any changes you've made, and then update that date. And there you go. You have documents that continue to stay current. That is where I'm going to leave it. I'd say just a few tiny tips is that I'd say if this is not your process, think through each step of your process. And I recommend you create a thing that you fill out during that step and it stays with that step instead of trying to keep records that like move through multiple things and get lost and get wet and just like never happen. And also printing off things when you're actually making stuff instead of having stuff live in binders that you have to remember to like if you have a log in a binder that always gets lost on a shelf, like it's actually okay, I'm in production, I have to print off the sheets today. It reminds you to actually do it. If you want to, I didn't get to talking about product labels. So there is a freebie on my website at ellenrawley.com/product compliance that gives you kind of the lowdown on the labeling requirements. And so that's there for you. And that's where I'll leave it for today. So I hope that kind of simplifies a little bit what some of this stuff could look like in your business.
Thank you, Ellen. That was great. So much great information there. I'm going to pass it off to Jenna.
Okay, thank you all so much. I'll admit I was a little nervous to follow Ellen and Linda because I was like, oh no, what if I'm doing everything wrong? But I think we're good. And I do wish I had known them when we were developing our value-added line, because I think they could have made things a lot easier for me and we might have gotten there a little bit faster. But thank you for having me. My name is Jenna Muller. I am a co-owner of Full Belly Farm in Yolo County up in the Capay Valley. I live here and work here also. And I thought I would just start by giving you a little bit of background about our farm and the history. Oh, Allison, I see you chatting. Thanks. Thanks so much. So we got started in 1984 and my in-laws moved up here to the Capay Valley and they just had purchased this sort of dilapidated old dairy farm with not too much on it. Just an old walnut orchard and some old dairy equipment. And since then, we have grown to be about 450 acres. We've been certified organic from the beginning. We grow approximately 80 different things, which clearly is way too much and crazy, but we also feel like diversity is one of our pillars and really important. And it kind of ties into why we wanted to develop a value-added product line. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. So in addition to being, mostly a fresh fruit and vegetable farm, we also raise sheep. We have about 200 sheep. They're all having their baby lambs right now, so that's fun. We have about 1,000 chickens for egg production, and we have all of our animals on a rotational grazing program. There's 6 of us who own the farm, and we're split up amongst 2 generations. And actually, not all of our owners are family. So that's something that's a little bit interesting about us as well. And you can see in this picture, so this is a picture of our certified commercial kitchen. So the bottom story is all kitchen, and the top story is where I live with my family. We're still not sure if that was a great idea to live right above where we work or not. The jury is still out. Sometimes it seems like a good idea and sometimes it seems crazy, but that's what we did. So there you have it. So my husband and I, we were living in San Francisco and we knew we wanted to come back to the farm back in 2009, 2010. But we wanted to add, our own thing to the farm. We wanted to bring something new to the operation to kind of help grow it into the future and to have something at the farm that was kind of our own. So we moved back with the intention of doing some on-farm dining and also incorporating value-added production to the farm. So we had in the beginning really no idea what we were doing. And I was kind of laughing at the beginning about the title of this webinar. It said safe and compliant. And when we started, we were safe, but I would say definitely also uncompliant. And so in those early years, we just did a lot of experimenting. We had a little outdoor kitchen. We used my mother-in-law's kitchen just to figure out, well, what works and what doesn't work? And what do we feel like we could do? Is there really a market for this? And those were some really important times for us in figuring out what do we want to make and what makes sense and can we scale this up? And does it make sense to invest in a facility? We eventually decided that, yes, we can scale this up. Yes, there is a market. Yes, we feel like we can do this. And it would be really helpful to have our own facility. We did rent a facility down the road, but, ultimately it was just, it was very, very tiny. And so, driving everything and loading everything up and unpacking and then using somebody else's space and then getting home at the end of the day, we just felt like, we can really, we could do this better if we were in our own space. And we also wanted to have a space where we could cook for the public. So we wanted to do farm dinners and have a space to do that as well. So we were looking at building something that could accommodate both of those things. And it was a really big process. It took us 4 years to build the kitchen, to design the kitchen, convince our business partners that it was a good idea, and then 2 years to actually build it. And we worked a lot with our county in building the facility that we wanted, because we really wanted something that didn't feel like a commercial kitchen. It is a commercial kitchen and it has all the certifications, but we wanted it to feel warm. We wanted it to have wooden surfaces and not just be all stainless steel. And so that was a big process that we went through with our county to kind of walk them through why we wanted it to look the way it, the design had it looking, and all the things we wanted to do there, and why it was a good idea to allow agricultural businesses to invest in these types of buildings. So eventually they kind of got on board with what we wanted to do, and we finished it in 2016. We've spent a lot of time experimenting with what we do, and we kind of continue to experiment. But our real focus is taking seconds from the farm and turning that into something that's usable. Because what we were noticing at the farm was that, and if you're a farmer, I'm sure you are familiar with this, you spend so much effort and resources growing things, and then a lot of what you grow can't be sold. So maybe it's cosmetically imperfect, maybe it's a little bit too ripe. And so we were like, gosh, it would be great if we could take these things that, oopsies, I think I lost control of my slides. There we are. Okay, sorry, let me get organized here. There we go. It would be great if we could gain some value out of those things that we have already been investing in. And so we only use things that we grow on our farm, and then we have a few things that we buy to put in them, but it really means that we're not necessarily always consistent from year to year in what we grow. So we make strawberry jam, but one year the deer got in and ate all of our strawberry plants, so we had no strawberries, so we couldn't make strawberry jam. And that's fine if you're only selling at farmers markets, but if you want to get into grocery stores, they get a little bit grumpy when you're like, sorry, we can't fill that slot in your store anymore until next year when maybe we'll have more strawberries. So it's both a good thing and it's a challenge. In 2017, we received a VAPG grant, and that was hugely helpful. I know that Ellen, she helps out with VAPG grants if you're interested in applying. We just applied for it ourselves. I do wish I had known about her because it's a pretty onerous application, but it was a really amazing opportunity for us because we could use it to pay for labor. So when we were doing some of that experimenting and figuring out what worked, it wasn't all on us. We had some additional funding to help us work through some of those things. We also hired a designer to design our labels and kind of create a cohesive line for us. And then you can also use it to pay for packaging. I think some of the rules around the VAPG may have changed since we did it. So I don't know if you can still use it for designing, but we were able to, and that was just hugely helpful in being able to hire an artist and figure out what we wanted our labels to look like without having to make that whole investment ourselves. Let's see. So we made a bunch of decisions along the way that I wanted to share with you. As both Linda and Ellen mentioned, there's various levels that you can try and get to, and we decided that we didn't want to do the cannery license. And so we do some shelf stable foods, but they're all high acid, which meant that we could do them without a canning license. So that includes tomato sauce, peach jam, apricot jam. We make a quince butter, tomato jam, orange marmalade, and candied orange peel. I think we are happy with that decision. We really did want to do salsa, but we just felt like we weren't going to be able to meet those requirements of a canning facility, and we don't want to use a co-packer at this point. So that's where we are. We do make a lot of other things, and all of the other things that we make, we have that, perishable, keep refrigerated labeling on. So that includes cured olives, fermented dill pickles, bread and butter pickles. We do a fermented hot sauce. We do some pumpkin puree, pumpkin pie filling around Thanksgiving. And so all of those, they just get that label, and that kind of protects us and lets people know, hey, this isn't canned and it needs to stay in the refrigerator. We also grow wheat. And so we do some things with wheat, like we do tea cakes, seasonal tea cakes, and pizza dough and pie dough and a whole egg pasta. And some of those things are frozen. We do cornmeal, whole grain flour, almond butter. We do dried fruit. We brought a dehydrator that's now in the kitchen, candied walnuts, olive oil, safflower oil. So these are all things that are a part of our line. And most of our products are certified organic, but we made the decision not to certify some of them. So our tea cakes are not part of our certified organic line. Just because we wanted to use local eggs, but the local eggs are not certified. And so we didn't want to go down that road yet, but we probably will certify them at some point, but that's just something to think about. And I wanted to just talk about a few of the lessons that we've learned. I think you need to think about your market channels. And if you do want to sell to stores, can you have something that's going to be consistent year round? Because that's a challenge. We work with some smaller grocery stores who are more flexible, but the bigger ones like Nugget Market, they want to see that slot on their shelf full kind of at all times of their year, of the year. And then, we also want to make sure that your value added product is actually adding value, right? So I think there's a lot of things that we did. There's this photo on the left of these beautiful crackers that we made with our wheat. They're spectacular. They were great, but they took so much time and so much effort that we're like, there's no way this could make us any money ever, because we'd have to charge, like $35 a bag to make our money back on them. So there was a lot of things like that. So I think in the beginning, when you're developing your products, you want to be very careful about tracking your time. How long is everything taking? What are your ingredients costing? And really figuring out, can you sell it at a price point that makes sense, where you're actually making money? Because some things like ketchup, like crackers, like pumpkin pie dough for us, were just too expensive to make, so we cut them. So you want to focus on things that you can do efficiently and that have easy and inexpensive packaging. And then We still really struggle. We really want to have kind of everything in glass. We want to get away from using plastic, but that's been a real challenge for us. So that's something that we're still struggling with. So you think about packaging as you go along. Inspections, and I really loved Ellen's presentation on inspections and record keeping. And I wanted to just, I think there was a question in the Q&A about, if you need an Excel spreadsheet. And I just wanted to reassure everybody that this really can be, as Ellen said, it can be very simple. So we just use a binder, and there's a bunch of tabs in the binder, and all the tabs have a different product that we make. Every day when we make something, we have a sheet of paper that has the product, it has the recipe, and then we write down, okay, here's the lot number of the sugar that we use, here's the lot number of the lemons, the fruit all came from our farm, it has a date on it, it has instructions, and then the lot number goes on that sheet, and then we have a little label gun and the sticker goes on the jar. So it's really not, our way of doing it is, it's probably not the best way, but it's simple, and we've never had any issues with it when it comes to our inspections. So I just want to say that it feels really hard to develop a system, but it does not have to be complicated, and you really don't need anything fancy to be able to do it well and in a way that's going to satisfy inspectors. So we get inspected by CCOF, and that's sort of our most consistent one. We are inspected by the state, the county, and then our hood requires a fire inspection once a year, and then we do water samples monthly. And I think our organic inspection is the thing that takes the most time and the most preparation, but none of it is onerous. And I hope that this part of it doesn't keep anybody from trying out doing value-added production, because it's really not so terrible once you have a system in place. And we kind of try and make it easy for ourselves by keeping our recipes really, really simple. So for all the jams that we make, the only ingredients are the fruit and sugar and lemon juice, and that's it. And so we're not having to buy a lot of things that we're then needing to keep track of on an incoming log. So we do try and keep it simple to make that a little easier for ourselves, and also let the vegetables and the fruit that we're using really be the star of the show. So don't let that be the reason that you don't do it, I would say. That's it for me. So I think I made up a few minutes here, so we can move into the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jenna. That was wonderful, and great photos too to accompany your presentation.
Thank you.
All right, before we launch into Q&A, I'm hoping that we can just do launch a poll, Guido. If that's something that you can do, let me know. And yeah, it looks like the poll just came up. So if you could just take a few moments to answer the 2 questions that are on your screen, that would help us out in evaluating the workshop and the work that we do, and making sure that it stays relevant to you all. And then Guido, based on what you're seeing on your end, feel free to end it or just come off mute and let me know that you're ending it.
Yeah, it looks like about a little over half the participants have participated. Should we give it maybe another minute?
Yeah, maybe let's give another minute.
Another
Folks,
30
if
seconds.
you're-
There's 80%
Yeah.
already, so.
Okay, great. And then some of the questions have been answered in the Q&A box, but if there are others, please go ahead and drop those in, folks.
And Grace, I saw one in the chat that I can tackle on considering a building plan for a commercial kitchen on site. And
Great.
so Lizette, I believe that there are sort of pre-approved plans that you can buy for a commercial kitchen. And there's also, we have a neighbor who has, it's pretty cool, actually. It's kind of like a travel trailer that is a commercial kitchen that she bought. And the manufacturers, they kind of like guarantee that it'll pass an inspection. So yes, I think that there are pre-stamped plans that you can use. And then we just let our insurer know what we're doing. And it's so the question was, what insurance policies do we have? And so it's just part of our general liability. We just let them know what they're doing, and they roll it into our overall insurance package, our general liability policy for the farm.
Thanks, Jenna. All right, I stopped sharing my screen just so that we can all see each other and not that widescreen view on our computers. I didn't see any other questions in the chat that haven't been answered, at least. So if we did miss your question, please either put it in the chat or preferably put it in the Q&A box, so that it's a little easier for us to monitor the questions coming in there. Linda or Ellen, were there any questions that came through the Q&A that you wanted to expand on? Thank you for answering those.
I was just wondering if Jenna or Ellen had any experience with the question from somebody who works at a food bank. I'm pretty sure that if they were producing whatever they wanted to produce in an inspected commercial kitchen, or if they were registered as a food processor and producing it in an inspected facility, even if it was attached, then they should be able to give that product away. But so that the question was about cheese, and I'm pretty sure that the cheese would need to be inspected by CDFA under the milk branch. But obviously on those things, I think you really need to ask the questions before you start, but it should be feasible was my answer. But I always get questions that I've never been asked before, and then I'm always unsure.
So how do I say this? I haven't really seen folks. I've worked with people who make product in a commercial kitchen and then give away some of their product, and that's totally fine. You don't have to sell it. The other way around is like, I haven't really worked with, I don't know if part of the question was like, if I'm giving it away, can I not have it in a commercial kitchen? I haven't really come across that. I think and I wondered, Jenna, if you or Grace have more research on this. I know people do things like, well, what if I do a class and then people are taking it home, and so I'm not selling the product, I'm like selling the class. I think it gets tricky because if someone ends up getting sick from your product, though, like you want to have the things that you needed to have in place to protect yourself. So I'm more conservative than some folks are, riskier with their decisions.
Yeah, we fall on the riskier side. And so we have done a few classes here where people can something, or we make pickles with them and then they take it home. And that is probably not totally what we should be doing if we were following everything to a T. Especially because you do have to have people who are making it who are certified food handlers. And so if it's just guests who are coming, yeah, so that's a tricky one. And I think if I'm remembering the question correctly, the kitchen wasn't certified where it was made. So that probably would be another reason not to give it away. But
yeah, they said they have a teaching kitchen, but they're working on building a commercial kitchen. So in my mind, if it's a commercial kitchen registered as a commercial kitchen and you're operating like you're a commercial kitchen, then anything you produce there and put it in a package is like you could sell it or you could give it away, right? Where it gets tricky is, I think, if you just have a kitchen, but it's not registered, and now you're just making food at the back of the food bank and wanting to give that away, that's, I think, not allowed. But, you know, that's where I would be asking my local health inspector for more guidance, for sure.
Mhm.
I had a question about what program I use to build record keeping, and it sounds like Jenna similarly, I don't know. Well, all the forms you saw, like if it's going to be printed off and just filled in, which is the majority of the folks I work with, that's what they do. I just build them in Excel because I like how I can make them look. I just find it easy to use. If they want to be able to like do it on an iPad and just save the file, then I'll do it in a lot of times Google Sheets so that they can just like access it through Wi-Fi. There are programs out there that do tracking. I haven't still found one that's good for small producers. They're more complicated than most small producers need. So like they're just for a larger, and you have to you have to do a lot more steps to do your tracking, and that's kind of what makes it more onerous for most people. So I'm hoping for the day that there's something very easy, like kind of like FreshBooks accounting or something, but for processing, but I haven't seen it yet. If anyone does know of one and wants to stick it in the chat, that would be awesome. But yeah, hopefully at some point.
Thanks, Ellen.
There was a question about orange juice, and did you see that one, Linda?
Yeah.
I'm hoping you know the answer about
Yeah,
pasture.
it's kind of funny because I had orange juice in my original example and I took it out. But this is an example of another question that I've never been asked before. Because in this scenario, the person wants to have a mobile juice operation that would go from farm to farm to farm to farm and make the juice on site at that farm. And juice, as I mentioned, has a separate regulation, CFR 120, the juice HACCP regulation. If you are making fresh juice on the farm and selling it, putting it in a bottle and selling it directly to the consumer, you don't have to pasteurize it, but you do have to label it with a warning label. In this scenario, where the juicer is moving, I don't 100% know how that would be viewed, because the juicing would be happening on location and selling presumably on location. So it might qualify as a retail exemption. But if any of that juice moves to another location for sale, then it would not qualify for the retail exemption, and it would need to receive some sort of pasteurization treatment. But again,
Is that true for like farmers market too? If you go to farmers market, does it have to be sold like on a farm store?
No, if you are
Okay.
selling, if you made it and well, okay, you might hire somebody to sit at your stand.
Yeah.
Market, but it's your farmer's market
Okay.
stand. You're selling it to the final consumer. You're good. But let's say you're making it and you want Full Belly Farm to sell the product from their retail store, then you've moved to the next level. Yeah.
Thank you all. We need to start wrapping up. Unfortunately, we haven't had enough time for all the questions, the great questions that have come in. It's often in the regulatory landscape, like one scenario leads to more questions, more questions, more questions. So I think, I've heard from our wonderful panelists today, some resources that can help. I'll be dropping the presentation into Sched. So go to the this workshop page in Sched later today, and you should be able to find the presentation. And then, yeah, for other questions, you have the contact information in the presentation for the panelists, and they have offered to be a resource that way. So with that, I want to give a huge round of applause to the panelists, Linda, Ellen, and Jenna. Thank you so much. And I will hand it over to Guido.
Yes, thank you so much to everyone who participated and to the speakers. We'll see you with more workshops today and tomorrow, and then the regional gathering, so stay tuned. Thank you.